Hi guys, you all right? Hope you're all okay and you've had a good week. I was just saying to the other ones, the younger kids in the other group that, other video, I'm tired today. But yeah, hopefully I'll sleep well tonight. And hopefully you guys are all right and enjoying the sunshine after we've had some rainy days and now it's nice and sunny. Hooray. Okay, so we're carrying on looking in Acts and we're going through Acts chapter 8 all the way through to Acts chapter 6 verse 8 all the way to Acts chapter 8 verse 1. So it's a long chunky passage, and to get us sort of kick-started, we're going to have a little game of true or false. So you can play this at home on your own and just come up with your own true or false or you can just listen to mine. So I've got a few just to get us going. Basically, true or false. Jesus is the Son of God. True or false? Yeah. Jesus said that everyone loved him, and so anyone who follows him will also be loved by everyone. Did I say that a bit fast? I'll slow it down. Jesus said that everyone loved him, and so anyone who follows him will also be loved by everyone. True or false? Another one. Jesus said that it would be easy to follow him. True or false? And the last one. Jesus taught us to love everyone except our enemies or those who don't like us. True or false? Okay, so you might want to carry on, pause this if you want to and do some more of your own, but hopefully that's got your minds working. And why have we done that? Well, today when we learn about Stephen, when we hear his story, we see that he is accused of saying things that aren't true. And actually, he was accused of saying things that he didn't say. Yeah, so things that aren't true, and it also wasn't true that he said it. Wow, there you go. Wow, brain melt. Okay, so it's a pretty long passage from the Bible today. So instead of me just reading it out, because I think that would probably be a little bit, tiny bit boring, it's on the website if you want to read it together, which is a good idea. It's great for you to read it yourselves. Or there's some videos that you can watch as well. And just for the purpose of this, I've got a little paraphrased version that I will read. So you do get the story here. But yeah, have a look on the other resources if you want to read it for yourself or pick up your own Bible and have a read. And that would be great. Okay, so this is the sort of paraphrased version. Stephen's story. Stephen was a Christian man in the city of Jerusalem who loved God and Jesus very much. He understood the power of the Holy Spirit in his life. He was a deacon, a servant, of the church in Jerusalem and helped make sure that the poor widows received their fair share of the food. We learned about that last week. He also taught many people about Jesus and even performed many miracles in Jesus' name. Stephen wanted everyone to know the good news about Jesus. He knew that there were many Jews who followed God but didn't yet believe in Jesus, so he went to a synagogue to preach. The synagogue is where Jewish people gathered. The leaders of the synagogue became very angry. Now, we've kind of heard this before, haven't we, with other people? Same sort of things happening. They did not believe what Stephen was saying about Jesus. In fact, they became so angry that they began telling lies about Stephen to make everyone else hate him. They said Stephen was saying bad things about the Jews and about God. They said he wanted to destroy their temple and stop them from worshipping God. Because they were so angry at Stephen, they took him to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was a group of Jewish religious leaders who could make decisions like in a courtroom. And even when the Jewish leaders of the synagogue were saying all these lies in the courtroom, Stephen continued to trust God. He had so much faith in God that his face was really peaceful. The people said, his face is like the face of an angel. Anyone ever said that about you? Don't think they've ever said that about me either. Maybe one day. When the high priest, who was the judge, asked Stephen if these things were true, Stephen had a very good answer. He answered by telling everyone the story of God and how God had sent his son Jesus to save his people. He talked about many people in the Bible, like Abraham, who was the very first Jew and the father of a great nation. He also talks about Abraham's descendants, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. He talks about Moses, who helped save God's people from the Egyptian slavery and then recorded the Ten Commandments and the rest of the law. He talked about David and Solomon and how Solomon built the temple. And he also talked about Jesus, who was killed by the non-believing Jews. Stephen talked about how that God had sent his son Jesus and how the Jews had rejected him. Stephen spoke the truth But it made the people in the Sanhedrin very angry, and they took him out of the city to throw stones at him until he died. There, watching it all, was a man called Saul. He agreed that killing Stephen was a good idea, and we'll hear more about Saul later. Just before he died, Stephen prayed out to God, asking him to forgive them for what they were doing. Okay, so that's the story in a sort of a nutshell. It's one of the longest speeches in Acts, the one from Stephen, and it is long. But basically, he does a similar thing to what we've seen Peter and John do before when they get taken in before the officials. And he goes back to the beginning of history and he says, the God that I'm talking about is no different to the one that you're talking about. I am not blaspheming against the temple because we're talking about the same God here. But what he does do when he talks about Solomon and building the temple, before Solomon built the temple, when he mentions Moses and everyone else, he's basically saying to them, God was like meeting people way before the temple was built. So before Solomon built the temple, God met with others, and like Moses in the burning bush, and he met with other people, and he didn't have to be in a temple to meet with people. So he was kind of like shocking them a little bit with that news, because that's not something that they thought that they were going to hear. So yeah, his accusers said that Stephen taught against the Jews, but Stephen talked about Abraham, Isaac and Jacob and pointed out that the Jews were God's nation. So he's not saying anything against the Jews there at all. The accusers said that he was blaspheming Moses, but Stephen outlined how the law was handed down through Moses and that God told Moses that a prophet, Jesus, would be sent from among the Jews. So instead of accepting this, God's people had rejected both Moses and God. So he was never, ever saying blasphemy against Moses. He was just telling them how it was. His accusers said that Stephen taught against the temple, but he reminded them that before Solomon built the temple, there was the tabernacle or the tent of witness or tent of meeting, and God could never be contained in a house made with human hands or any building, ever. And these things are similar to what Jesus himself was accused of falsely before his death too. And another similarity is, you might have picked up on it, is that like Jesus, Stephen prayed to God to forgive those who were responsible for his death, which, wow, pretty amazing. So at the beginning of our true or falses, hopefully you got them all right, but one of the ones I said was, Jesus taught us to love everyone except our enemies or those who don't like us. Was that true or false? Of course it's false. Jesus said, no, you need to love everyone, guys. Even your enemies or people you don't like or people who don't like you. And Stephen lived that out right to the end by even asking for their forgiveness for what they were doing to him. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? Okay, so have I got any questions for you? Yes, I have. After hearing all of that, have you got any first thoughts? What's standing out to you, striking you? Have a little chat with whoever's with you about anything that's standing out. And then the other thing to say is, it's quite difficult for us to imagine what it must have been like for Stephen just before he died. I don't know about you, but I've never found myself even close to that sort of situation. Can't imagine what it must have been like for him. And also I was thinking about how I can't really imagine what it must be like to be a Christian in a country where you're not allowed to be one. So in some places in the world, we've spoken about this before, you're forbidden for being a Christian. You can't just go to church like we can in a normal situation. You can't even do Zoom like this. Even if it's rubbish, you still can't do this because this is really open. And if people knew what you were doing, you'd be in big, big trouble. And, your life would be threatened. So I was thinking, I don't even know what that feels like either. But it did make me think, is there anything that you guys have missed about not being able to go to church? So we're in that situation where we can't. And also we know that we don't really know when it's going to change. This might be like this for a little while yet. And so what have you missed? And how does it feel knowing that actually we might be like this for a little bit longer? So have a little think about those questions. They're quite deep. Share with your parents or your carers what you think about that. And then I've got something else to say. Okay, so when Stephen was talking back to those who were accusing him of preaching against the law and God's temple, he made sure to tell them that way before the temple, God met with people in other places. So he was pointing that out again. I've said that already, but it's just really important to know, because he was telling them that God isn't stuck in a building. He meets with people everywhere and anywhere. And so actually for us at this moment where we're thinking, really miss church, or it's rubbish that we can't go there, it's not the same, we have to remember, we should know that actually we don't need to go to a church building to meet with God, or even to be church. We've said at the beginning of Acts that church is about the people. It's never been about the building. And that's what Stephen was saying in this, when he brought them back all the way back to Abraham. He was saying, and God meets with people wherever they are. It's not about the temple. It's not about the church building. And even for us at the moment in this situation, that's what we'd do well to remember as well, wouldn't we? So what are the ways then, while we don't have this option to go to church, what are the ways that we can meet with God? Have a little think. What are the ways that you can do that? Oh, thought someone was coming in then. They're not. Yeah, any ideas? Ways that we can meet with God? Obviously praying, talking about him, reading, all the usual things, singing, worshipping. They're ways that we can meet with God. And we don't need a church for that. We just need to want to do it. So, anything else? Okay, I'll read this bit. While we're not able to go to church as we're used to, it's a tiny bit like we're getting a tiny, teeny taster of what it could be like for those people who live in countries and places where you're not allowed to be a follower of Jesus openly. It's only a tiny, teeny bit because our lives aren't in danger. But we don't have the luxury of meeting together in one big happy group. And maybe we feel frustrated about that, and that our faith is being constrained because of the rules. And when Stephen was dragged out in front of the official, it says his face was like an angel. And Stephen was so close to God before this. He lived his life serving and worshipping God, and that could be seen by those around him, even in his own appearance. And it kept him strong and firm in his faith, even when he was being killed. And that is a huge challenge for us, isn't it? And it made me think, how close to God do we feel? Do we feel close to God right now? There's probably times when we feel closer than others. And can others see that we spend time praying, reading, meeting with God? I'm not sure anyone could say that about me, but we just got to do our best, haven't we, to be as close to God as we want to be. We can be as close to God as we want to be, basically. It's up to us. And then the final thought for you guys, is there anything that you can think of to do to stand up for God? And so when I say that, remember that every time we tell the truth, every time we stick up for injustice, every time we include those who are being left out, or share what we have, or help others out in any ways that we can be helpful, every time we behave for our parents or carers or teachers, all those things, when we do what is right by God, we are standing up for God, and we are showing others the right way to live, basically. So have a think. Is there anything you can do this week? Challenge yourself to see if you could do anything to stand up for God, or is there one thing that you can do this week to get closer to God? Can you do anything that might make you feel closer to God? I'll give you that opportunity. Have a look at that. There's something else on the resources for parents if they want to have a look at, to do with the persecuted church, and there's some word searches and the puzzles you can do. Have you got any of your own ideas? Maybe you have, that you'd like to do to help you to remember the story. Please do share them with us. That'd be brilliant. And then, of course, there's a couple of other ideas for crafts, and there's a song from Ian. And of course, this one that I showed you last week, and I'm still colouring mine in. I told you it would take time. It's quite tiny little drawings, aren't they? So I'm nearly done. And then once I've done it, I'm going to cut mine out and I'll show you what I've done on Sunday. So if you could do the same, that'd be brilliant. We can show them at the end. That'd be ace. If you've got the confidence to do that, that'd be brilliant. And before we go, we're just going to pray. Okay, ready? Yeah, Father in heaven, we thank you for the story of Stephen, and that even though it's a hard one for us to read, it's hard for us to sometimes understand why he had to die in the way that he did. And we can't imagine what it must have been like for him. But what we do see is a man who was so firm in his faith and so close to you that even faced with the most scariest of situations and the most horriblest of deaths, all he wanted was for them people who were doing it to know you, and he cried out that they would be forgiven for what they'd done. Lord, help us to have the same kind of desire to want to be close to you. Help us to have the same view of our enemies, that actually you love them just as much as you love us, and that actually the biggest thing we can do is to forgive. And so we just pray for all the boys and girls watching today, and just ask that they'd have a really good week, that you would speak to them as they carry out the crafts and things like that they're going to do, as they read, as they pray. I'd ask that they would feel closer to you, and be with them and their families. In Jesus' name, amen. And here's a song from Ian.
Hello everyone. So we're looking at the story of Stephen today, and his discussion, his debate with the people that were in charge of the temple in Jerusalem. And so Stephen, they were saying this is where God lives, in the temple, so you can't speak against the temple. And Stephen reminds them from their own history that God's never lived in a temple. He's far too big to live in a temple, isn't he? He's far too big to live in a church. He's far too big to live in an ocean. He's far too big to live in a skyscraper. In fact, God's so big, he created the universe. He's bigger than the universe because he created it. And yet the same God who created the universe, who's everywhere and all-powerful, is the same God who knew you when you were growing in your mum's tummy and knew before you were even born. And the same God who includes you in his plan, that he gets to know people like you and me. So this is a song that you might know. It's called Our God is a Great Big God. And we remind ourselves that God doesn't live in churches. So at the moment when we can't get into church and we can't meet together as a church, it's quite sad, but we can meet God wherever we are, because God's a lot bigger than any building, and he doesn't live in any building, does he? So this is how the verse goes. It says, our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God, and he holds us in his hands. Your turn. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God, and he holds us in his hands. Okay, so that's the verse. And then, so that's the chorus, and here's the verse. It goes like this. He's higher than a skyscraper, and he's deeper than a submarine. He's wider than the universe and beyond my wildest dreams. And he's known me and he's loved me since before the world began. How wonderful to be a part of God's amazing plan. Should we try that bit together? He's higher than a skyscraper. He's higher than a skyscraper, and he's deeper than a submarine. He's wider than the universe, wider than the universe, and beyond my wildest dreams. And he's known me and he's loved me since before the world began. How wonderful to be a part of God's amazing plan. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God, and he holds us in his hands. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God, and he holds us in his hands. He's higher than a skyscraper, and he's deeper than a submarine. He's wider than the universe and beyond my wildest dreams. And he's known me and he's loved me since before the world began. How wonderful to be a part of God's amazing plan. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God, and he holds us in his hand. One more time. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God. Our God is a great big God, and he holds us in his hands. And he holds us, and he holds us in his hands. Yes, he holds us in his hand. One Good, eh? So let's remind ourselves that God is bigger than anything else. He's everywhere. He lives everywhere. He doesn't live in a church building. So even though we can't be together, we can still meet with God wherever we are because he wants to meet with us. So that's good, isn't it? Okay, have a great week and I'll see you soon.